That's she confirmed open.
Thank you, Clerk, and good morning, members. We do have a quorum, and I now call the meeting to order. I welcome all members to this meeting of the Committee for Communities. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off? Mobile tablet devices can, however, be used through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network, and no recordings or photographs may be taken. May I remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices. Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablet devices discreetly and in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and be aware of cameras when using tablet devices, and I would also remind everyone of the sensitivity of the microphones. Finally, I would remind members of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. So in terms of that, I will declare that I have previously worked as a social worker in light of we have BASWA in today, and also that I am an owner of a private rented property. So any other interest, members? Alan, Andy?
Yes, Chair, likewise, private sector landlord.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, members. Moving on then, apologies, members. Clerk, please.
Ellie Armstrong.
Yeah, thank you. Members aware of any other apologies? No, I think we've full attendance anyway, apart from Kelly. Okay then, members, no items to report in Chair's business, and I move then to draft minutes in item 3. Can I refer you, please, members, to the draft minutes from the meetings on both the 30th of May and from the 6th of June, which are pages 6 and then page 12, respectively, of your meeting pack. Are members content to agree the minutes of 30th of May 2024 as drafted?
Agreed.
Yeah. And the minutes of the 6th of June as drafted, members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. Matters arising, members, and there are a few which we need to work our way through. So, as we didn't have a quorum last week's meeting, we now need to consider matters arising from that meeting, as well as additional items which have arisen since last week. As you will see from your pack, there are a fair few items there for discussion. So, members, you've been provided with a reply from the Department of Education at page 19 to committee queries on an anti-poverty strategy. That reply states that the Department takes poverty into account when considering the budget, and measures of social deprivation form part of the core school funding mechanism. In addition, the Department provides funding for a range of policies and interventions that support school-aged children who may be impacted by social disadvantage or poverty. The Department of Education, members, has played, they have advised us, an active role in cross-departmental working groups, contributing to the development of the anti-poverty strategy, and it will continue to do so going forward. So any comments, members, or content to note that? Content to note, thank you. Then page 21, go ahead, Brian.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm just thinking, maybe it's not necessary just to declare that I'm on the Board of Governors of Belfast Boys Model School and Malvern Primary School. I know the Boys Model School in particular receives a number of that special funding, for a high level of free school meals. So,
okay, yeah. Thank you, Brian. Members, then page 21, there's a reply to committee queries on recommendations from the Equality Commission on ensuring compliance with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. That reply states that consideration of the need for review and potential reform of disability legislation here will be a key aspect in the development of the disability strategy, and will be cross-cutting, with executive approval needed. Full consideration of the Malcolm judgment will form a rudimentary aspect in any consideration of legislative change here in the North. Any comments, members, or content to note that response? Content to note, thank you, members. Then you've been provided, members, of page 23 with the Delegated Powers Memorandum for the Pensions Extension of Automatic Enrolment Bill. Are members content that the committee forward a copy of the memorandum to the Examiner of Statutory Rules for review and advice?
Agreed.
Thank you. At page 29, there's a reply from the Committee on Procedures to committee queries. The committee had asked that consideration be given to the provision of clear procedural guidance and/or criteria for when committee sessions should be open or closed, to include briefings in relation to bills which may be subject to accelerated passage. The response states that the Committee on Procedures noted that this is a matter that would affect all Assembly statutory and standing committees, and agreed therefore to refer it to the Chairperson's Liaison Group for initial consideration. The committee will be kept informed of feedback received from that. Do members have any comments or are content to note that?
Noted.
Content, thank you. Page 31, members, then there's a reply from the DWP in relation to committee queries on carers allowance. The reply states that to ignore receipt of carers allowance when other benefits are assessed would mean making provision twice over for the same needs. Members have any comments or do they wish? Go ahead, Sian.
I think they've missed the point a little bit in some of the narrative that we were asking about. For me, it was more about why carers allowance is a cliff edge benefit and not a tapered benefit. It's nothing to do with whether it's taken into account in the assessment of other benefits. For me, it is more why is it such a difficult benefit to I suppose to keep within the parameters. So for me, it would be more about asking about the tapered versus cliff edge.
Yeah. And are you proposing that we write back and ask them to clarify that?
If we could, I think
point?
that would be really worthwhile. I know that there is some hesitance within the department.
I knew it was the taper was really the issue in question as such. So, members content we seek further clarity? Yeah. Thank you, members. Then, members, at page 33 is a reply from Ards and North Down Borough Council to committee queries on how councils intend to comply with equality legislation for remote meetings regulations. The reply states the Council has retained the facilities for remote meetings and is awaiting further information from the Department in relation to the enactment of the legislation. At this time, the standing orders will be amended and remote meetings will recommence. Any comments, members, or content to note? Content to note, thank you. At page 34, members of your pack, there's a reply from the Scottish Government to our queries on carers' benefits. The new carer support payment will replace carers' allowance in Scotland. One of the key changes is to extend the benefit so it is paid to many carers who are in full-time education and who are currently unable to get carers' allowance. As well as this, there will be a carers' additional person payment that will provide an extra £10 per week for carers with multiple carer roles in recognition of the impact on their well-being. So, members, any comments in relation to that?
Other than I'd like to go to Scotland and bring in some of.
I think there is plenty there is lots to be learnt there, and there's even lots of measures that aren't necessarily costly, but extra tolerance and there are things that could be done for carers. But I think it's welcome to see in Scotland that more progressive approach, and I think carers, I've reiterated here many times, I think they do need more support, and anything that can be done in that effect should certainly be considered.
On a serious note, Chair, I think it was really useful to see what another devolved jurisdiction does in terms of its legislation around something that's really, really key to this committee. I think it would be really useful to see what other devolved administrations do, whether that is Wales or even looking to the south and seeing what is actually in place so that we can have that comparative analysis as well whenever we're looking at what is provided here. And if there are, as you say, Chair, there are, what Cliff Edge said this last week, there are things that could be put in place that don't necessarily need financial resource. So it would be really interesting to have that comparison at a later date in our future work plan.
Yeah, I think it will be useful to have, and it is, I think, crucial that the department continue and everyone involved continue to work closely with the sector to explore what more might be done or how things could be improved in a ongoing fashion. So, members content to seek that information from other.
Propose then a letter to both the Welsh Synod and check out the RY position as well.
That's great.
Yeah.
Members content. Yeah, thank you. So, members, then at page 37, there's a ministerial reply to our queries around the ministerial briefing session on the 18th of April. So that reply, it addresses quite a few of the queries from the session on the 18th of April. I don't intend to list them all, as one of these was the legislative programme, which was the subject of debate in the Chamber earlier this week. Are there any members of the committee who would like to draw attention to any of the points addressed within that response at this point? No, I'll just go through a few of them. So, housing supply strategy, revitalisation and community wealth building were both mentioned there, and I think those are issues that we need to continue to keep quite a close eye on. So, there's also an update in relation to Casement Park, which has been discussed at several meetings and which we had previously agreed to revisit when the correspondence had been issued to members. So, any comments in relation to that issue?
Just the concern given by the views expressed by the President of the GA that he's really worried about whether or not they are going to step up to the plate and provide the funding necessary for casement. And I'd have thought that it was imperative that should happen. We should be emphasising that with the Minister as well too, that he's exhausting every avenue in order to ensure that they do have the funding. Because this is an opportunity, not just say in terms of the GAA in itself, but for the whole community, and being able to host the European championships and that as well.
Okay, I see a hand raised by Ciara, who is on Zoom, so go ahead, Ciara. Not hearing you, Ciara?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's you now, yeah.
I was just re-emphasising again, and I know we've reiterated it, and the Housing Executive reiterated that refusal to end right to buy. It's basically given the current circumstances, and we're well aware of the decline of the social housing stock, and to be honest, it's really, really concerning, and particularly given last week's announcement of the capital investment of up to 400 social homes. So it's really, we're losing our accommodation, and it needs, I think, needs further consideration. And then likewise, that's turning the revitalisation of the Housing Executive. You know, they currently invest in their properties based on the current stock that they have, but if it's getting reduced to 500, I think there's about 500 sales per year, and it's the best stock that's getting sold off. And we've increasing demands placed on it. It's just, I think it's something we really need to reiterate with the Minister again to reconsider.
Thank you, Ciara. Sean, were you looking in as well?
Yeah, it was on previous point about casement. I think we've all expressed frustration, or at least I've expressed frustration on a number of points in this committee, and I think just the comments yesterday were just really disappointing. And knowing that no decision now will be made by the UK government until after an election, so that's a further 3-week wait. I just think that if we were at the precipice of losing it a month ago or 6 weeks ago, I'm not quite sure where we are now. But on Ciara's point about the right to buy, and I think we were all in the committee quite shocked last week when we got the oral briefing about the budget, and we realised just how reduced that the target is this year for the 400 homes in comparison to the 2,000 target is just a really, we're now at a critical juncture in terms of our social housing stock, and I would support Ciara's assertion that the right to buy needs to be revisited, and also that it feeds into the revitalisation programme of the Housing Executive.
Okay, so I'll take that. Are members content with that proposal? That we write to the Minister in relation to that?
Reconsider, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And also, Melissa, were you suggesting that we write to the Minister and urging him to follow all that?
Lost every avenue, yeah.
Yeah.
Exhausted,
Members
yeah.
content with that?
Yeah, Chair, can I just follow up on the house sales point? And I know there in the correspondence it highlights revenue that was raised as a result of the house sales. Can we maybe just ask the Minister to provide more detail, whether that comes directly from the Housing Executive as the reinvestment of that money? And you know, obviously in light of, and I think there are obviously differing views on the committee in terms of the policy intent of right to buy, and what it actually achieves, but whether the Minister would be looking at maybe tightening up if there are loopholes that exist where those properties end up ultimately going out of the wider sector in that terms. I have a firm belief, and I've seen it many times, that individuals who buy their homes are long-term tenants who have an intention of staying there, and as the Minister has articulated in the letter, quite often that will not result in those properties, if they're not sold, becoming available for allocation. So just looking at, is there a review in terms of tightening up where there may be any loopholes in terms of those properties leaving?
Yeah, members content to add that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you, members. Okay, thanks, members. Then moving on to page 44, and there's a reply there for, no, sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, that is, yeah. A reply there from the Equality Commission to our queries on whether there had been an update to its 2012 report on disability law reform. The reply states that the 2012 report remains its most recent detailed law reform proposals specific to disability. In the absence of any reform of the Disability Discrimination Act 1995, the recommendations from that report remain valid. Are you content with that, members, to note that response? Yeah, thank you. Then page 46, there's a reply from the Department of Justice on an anti-poverty strategy. It states that while there is no specific consideration given to poverty, all relevant business areas are mindful of the impact of poverty. The Minister has been supportive of the development of an anti-poverty strategy from when it was first proposed by the Minister for Communities. The Minister has participated in a ministerial steering group established by the Minister for Communities to oversee development of 4 social inclusion strategies, including the anti-poverty strategy. Members, any comments or content to note? Content, thank you. Members, of page 48 then, there's a departmental reply on welfare supplementary payments, labour market partnerships and discretionary support grant payments. We had asked for the following: information on the ongoing review of the recovery of overpayments of welfare supplementary payments in respect of social sector size criteria. Specifically, we had asked if there is a workaround on recovery programmes and a timescale for completion of this review and how the department will ensure that that process is fair. We had asked for more information on labour market partnerships and how different sectors are working together to improve employability and job opportunities. And we had asked whether the department would consider making automatic discretionary support grant payments to any applicants waiting longer than 5 weeks for a universal credit payment. So any comments in relation to any of that, members?
Just Chair, obviously I note the timeline in relation to the waiver facility. They've alluded to September 2024, just if we can keep an eye on that in terms of making sure it's actually achieved.
Okay. Clerk, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ciara. Go ahead, please, Deputy Chair. You're on mute, I think, Ciara.
Just in relation to the discretionary support, I think it would be useful just to ask how many people who are not eligible for the contingency fund have had to wait for more than 5 weeks. It would just useful just to get the scale of where that's at, the number of people that is being impacted by it, if that could be asked by, to the department.
Mm-hmm.
Members content?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely.
thank you. Okay, members, then page 54, there's a departmental reply on welfare reform. The committee had asked for an oral briefing on welfare reform following a recent announcement by the Prime Minister. The department states that when it obtains relevant further information on the proposals from DWP, officials will be pleased to provide an oral briefing to the committee at a future date. Any comments, members, or content to note? Ciara's your hand up again or up from previous?
Previous, sorry.
Thank you. Okay, members, content to note? Thank you. Page 56, there's a departmental reply on housing issues. So we had asked for information on the housing supply strategy, capital budget and the allocation for social homes, social housing building targets, reasons for targets not being met, the data used by the department to set targets, clarification in relation to the criteria for house building, in-house occupational therapists, retrofitting and mortgage vulnerability. Do members have any comments in any of those issues? Sian, go ahead.
Yep, just a couple that I had kind of thought. It's just if we can maybe ask the department when for a timeline around that housing supply strategy. I know that most people have asked and have been told that it's working at pace. So it would just be good to get a timeline for that. I am obviously very much invested in the specific measures to improve the social housing targets in rural areas. So I think that is of particular interest to me, because I think that is where a massive pressure point is being felt, especially within my own constituency, and then how the department plans to address the concerns raised by the social housing sector regarding the TCI calculation method.
The department proposes to address the concerns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Content with the
Yeah.
members content with that? Mm-hmm. Yep, thank you. Ciara, go ahead.
Just in relation to the social housing development targets and the criteria used, I would really like to get a breakdown of the range of data that they utilise and the sources that they utilise, and bringing forward and agreeing the social housing development programme for each of our constituencies. It's quite generalised response. I appreciate the response, but I would like to be further informed of exactly the range of criteria that is used, because it has been a concern raised even in my own local constituency and even local councillors across the board, across all parties. we welcome the reports and the presentations Housing Executive bring to Council, but we're still unclear as to all the range of criteria that is used by the team. So that would be useful to get more detail on that, please.
Okay, content, yep. Members content with that? Both? Yep, thank you. So members, then on page 63 we have a departmental reply in relation to gambling legislation. Committee had asked for sight of the codes of practice and for an update on the gambling prevalence survey. The department will provide the committee with copies of the initial proposed set of gambling codes of practice once the Minister has had the opportunity to review these. A timetable for the survey work is included at Annex A, page 65 of your packs. So any comments, members?
Just to the Chair, that as a member of the APG and gambling, I welcome that information being brought to this committee as well too, and hopefully committees in that can work closely on this whole issue as well.
Thank you, Monisha. Members content to note the response? Thank you. Members, page 66, there's a departmental reply to our committee queries on the discretionary support scheme. So we had asked for the following. If the Barnett consequential allocation in relation to the Household Support Fund for the North is specifically directed to a discretionary support budget, or if it is included as part of the department's overall budget. We had asked for details of expenditure against allocated budget for discretionary support since it has been in place. We had asked for an update on the status of the move to 24 months for repeat applications outlined in updated guidance, and we had asked for an update on the progress on the implementation of the recommendations from the independent review report, and if there's been any review or plan to look at staggered income levels. So any comments in relation to that, members? Content to note?
Noted.
Thank you. Page 69 then, we've a reply from the Causeway Coast and Glens Borough Council on our queries regarding councils and how they intend to comply with equality legislation for remote meetings regulations. That reply states that the council currently has in place a remote meetings protocol which forms part of its council's standing orders. This protocol facilitates remote working for any councillor or member of staff who may require this facility because of issues such as carrying responsibilities or ill health. The Council will, however, conduct a review of the protocol to ensure that the protocol meets the requirements of equality legislation and make any changes deemed necessary. So, do members have any comments or content to note? Content to note, thank you. Page 129, members, we have a ministerial reply to committee queries following the briefing which we received from the disabled people's organisations on the disability strategy. That reply states the Minister is currently considering the next steps to be taken in development of the Executive's disability strategy. The Minister will be writing to co-design group members in due course to thank them for their hard work to date and to set out how the disability strategy is to be taken forward, including how the Department will engage with stakeholders. An independent review of the co-design process used to develop the social inclusion strategies to date has been included in the response, along with a confidential copy of the research that the Department commissioned from the University of Galway to inform aspects of the disability co-design work in relation to disability legislative reform. So one thing that strikes me about that response is that there isn't a firm commitment to share the findings of that work with the people who work so hard on it, and I think that was a very clear ask from them. So I think, members, I'd be proposing that we maybe write back to the department and ask for direct clarity on that issue, that they will have sight of it before it's published. Would members be content with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Any other comments, members, in relation to that response, or content to note? Yeah, content to note, thank you. Members, page 233 then, there's a reply from Mid-East and Antrim Borough Council to our queries on hybrid working regulations. The reply states the Council will carry out an equality screening on its proposed arrangements in line with its statutory requirements. This will support compliance with equality legislation. Any comments or content to note? Content to note, thank you. At page 234, a reply from Mid-Ulster District Council to committee queries on hybrid working. The reply states that standing orders and any accompanying guidance will be developed with equality in mind, and that it is anticipated that Council will reinitiate hybrid meetings and not opt to transact its business fully remote. Council will comply with its equality scheme in screening any proposed decisions. Any comments, members, or content to note? Content. Thank you. Members who you have been provided page 235 with a departmental reply to a committee request for minutes of the Anti-Poverty Strategy Cross-Departmental Working Group. The reply states that as these minutes relate to an executive policy that is still in development and the executive have not yet considered input from the cross-departmental working group, the department does not feel it appropriate to share the minutes at this stage in the process. Any comments in relation to that, members? Content to note for now, yeah. Okay, thanks, members. Members, page 237, reply from Lisburn and Castlereagh City Council to our queries on hybrid working regs. The reply states the Council will consider any necessary changes to the operation of its meetings to comply with the new arrangements. This may subsequently require changes to Council standing orders. An equality screening exercise will be carried out to determine any impacts on Section 75 groups. A copy of the outcomes will be provided to you in due course. Do members have any comments or content to note that one? Content, thank you. Page 238 then, a reply from the Housing Executive to committee queries Housing First. The reply states the research contractor is currently in the final stages of drafting a report and a copy will be shared with the committee when it is finalised. Do members have any comments in relation to that or content to note? Content, thank you. Members, page 239, there's a reply from the Department for Economy to committee queries on anti-poverty strategy. The reply states there has been no engagement with the Minister for Communities on the anti-poverty strategy. Officials have attended one meeting about anti-poverty since the restoration of the executive. In the process of setting its budget, DFE does not specifically consider the impact of the allocations on poverty. Members, any comments or content to note? Content, thank you, members. Then, members, as there was no quorum last week when there was a briefing here from departmental officials in relation to the budget, I understand from watching back the meeting there was some significant additional detail provided in the briefing. So what I would propose, if members are content, that we ask for the briefing details which set out those further detail on the impact of the budget to be provided in a paper to committee. Yep. Members content, thank you. And are members also content that we ask the department to provide a copy of the annual business plan setting out the activities against that budget? Yeah. Thank you, members. Okay, members, so we're moving on then to item 5, which is our briefing by the British Association of Social Workers. Members, the papers for this agenda item start there in your pack at page 242. So I would now like to welcome to the meeting the following representatives. We'll just pause for a moment.
One of them has just taken a comfort break.
Will we suspend broadcast for a minute or two or leave it running?
I'll suspend.
Yeah, so we'll suspend just for a moment or two till we get the representatives arranged into the room. Thank you. It'll take a few minutes for that to happen.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound. Committee Room 29, Sound. Committee Room 29, Sound. Committee Room 29, Sound.
She confirmed open.
Okay, members, so I can confirm we are now back in open session, and I would like to welcome the following representatives from Baswa to this morning's meeting. So first of all, Carolyn Ewart, who is National Director of Baswa here in the North, and Andy McClenaghan, who is Public Affairs, Policy and Communications Lead for Baswa. So Carolyn, I think it's maybe yourself who's going to make an opening statement, a brief opening statement, please, and then we'll go to members' questions.
Indeed. We're going to share our opening statement, so I'll make a few opening remarks and then hand over to Andy, if that's okay. Yep. So I want to thank the Chair for the opportunity to brief the committee today. And as you say, I'm Carolyn Ewart and I'm the National Director for BASWA Northern Ireland, and that's the British Association of Social Workers in Northern Ireland. And this is my colleague Andy McClenaghan, our Public Affairs, Policy and Comms Lead. BASWA is part of the British Association of Social Workers across the UK, and we have some 22,000 members employed in frontline management, academic and research positions. We've members from students all the way through the social work career journey to directors of social work and policy makers. BASWA's Code of Ethics, to which all social work members sign up, details fundamental assertions regarding the role of the profession in relation to the alleviation of poverty and a specific commitment for social workers to help those in poverty. Given the nature of our integrated health and social care system, the majority of our engagement tends to be with the Health Committee. However, speaking with you today underscores the cross-cutting impacts poverty has for areas of responsibility across many Northern Ireland executive departments, not to mention the consequences it has for the lives of children, families and individuals across society. At the core of social work is a focus on promoting social justice, and poverty is a grave social injustice. Social workers witness firsthand the impacts of poverty. It's a major factor in contributing to or exacerbating many problems which require intervention from social services. Many of you will automatically think of children when I talk about social work, but this is not the case. We do work with children and their families, but we also work across mental health, older people, adult safeguarding, physical disability, special educational needs, ethnic minoritized communities and carers. And so every social worker will understand poverty and how it impacts people. Social workers hear and see every day how poverty limits the choices available to people who don't have enough money to live on, to pay the rent, to buy food, to provide for their children, and the shame and the guilt they feel and the anxiety and depression they experience. Poverty is part of the social work assessment, care planning and review process. All social workers will include consideration of the socio-economic circumstances, the impact on the individual, on household functioning, and on people's capacity to change. So important is the issue that the Department of Health produced an anti-poverty framework, and BASWA also produced an anti-poverty practice guidance document, both of which have the overt aim of bringing an anti-poverty approach to the foreground of practice. Social work also work across the voluntary and community sector and appreciate the extreme hardships that sector is currently facing. The cuts they have seen have been so harmful. Addressing cross-cutting issues impacting on poverty, such as housing, childcare, employment inclusion, is of fundamental importance to social work. It is why we believe that the executive should take forward the work of the Anti-Poverty Advisory Group and deliver on the anti-poverty strategy without delay. And I'll now hand over to Andy, who will give some more examples.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Chair. Chair, you'll be well aware Children's Services have undergone recently a very significant once-in-a-generation review led by Professor Ray Jones. Now, that review notes that the pressures of poverty impinging on stressed and sometimes overwhelmed parents are likely to make more prevalent what we call the toxic trio in social work. Now, that's poor mental health, drug and alcohol misuse, and domestic violence. We know that children and young people are often embarrassed and exhausted by their situations. Poverty destroys self-esteem and confidence and has long-term impacts for the families and communities social workers serve. Department of Health stats indicate that poor mental health in the most deprived areas of Northern Ireland are approximately 2.5 times the rate of those indicators for the least deprived areas. Tragically, we know that suicide rates are over 3 times higher in our most deprived areas than our least deprived areas. Shockingly, children in our most deprived areas of Northern Ireland are 6 times more likely to be placed on the Child Protection Register, 4 times more likely to be taken into care than children living in our most affluent areas. We know that growing up in poverty heightens the prevalence of adverse childhood experiences. This has associated increased long-term costs, not only for social work, but also for health. It has impacts in terms of educational underachievement, with associated costs to the education system, social security and economic development. It also leads to more young people becoming involved in antisocial behaviour and crime, resulting in additional costs for the criminal justice system. We also know that there are significant disparities in terms of life expectancy and healthy life expectancy for people living in our most and least deprived areas in Northern Ireland. Now, the Department for Community Statistics for poverty indicate that rates of poverty have increased in recent years. In 2021-22, 16% of our population were in relative poverty. By 2022-23, that had increased to 18%. Impacts are worst on children. The rates increase over the same period from 18% to 24% for children. Now, the costs of poverty, and this is what we really want to stress this morning to committee, the costs of poverty are enormous. The Northern Ireland Audit Office published a report in March, and it estimates the costs of child poverty to be between £825 million and £1 billion per year. The Child Poverty Action Group estimates that across the UK, child poverty costs the economy at least £39 billion per year. And research recently published in the journal Social Policy and Society indicates the annual public service cost of poverty in the Republic of Ireland is almost £4.5 billion per annum. It's vital that an anti-poverty strategy is urgently delivered by the Minister for Communities, and it's informed by the recommendations of the expert advisory panel, as mentioned by Carolyn, but also by the recommendations published by members of the Anti-Poverty Strategy Co-Design Group. A key focus of the anti-poverty strategy, from BAS's perspective, must be the removal of the universal credit to child limit. That limit restricts the child element of universal credit to the first 2 children in a family, and the result is that families affected by the limit lose out on £3,455 per child per year. We know that 10% of children in Northern Ireland are affected by the 2-child limit, and that larger families are much more likely to experience poverty. Now, the Minister for Communities, he has informed the Assembly that the cost of mitigating the 2-child limit would be £56.4 million per year. And that represents a very significant sum, no one's denying that, particularly in light of the restrictions of the current Northern Ireland executive budget. But what we feel often fails to be discussed is the cost of inaction. So I just mentioned some of the costs, the huge costs associated with poverty. And it's absolutely essential that long-term strategic decision-making concerning how best to tackle poverty and where to direct initiatives and interventions is informed by a knowledge of the total costs of poverty. So what we believe must happen is that the Minister for Communities acts on the recommendation of the expert advisory panel appointed by his predecessor and ensures that the anti-poverty strategy contains provisions for an audit of the public service costs of poverty. It's very, very hard to know how to tackle a problem when you don't actually know how much it's costing you. Provision of this information is urgently needed to guarantee the actions of the forthcoming strategy are appropriately targeted and adequately resourced, with additional funding provided by the Department of Finance to ensure effective and measurable interventions. Thank you for listening. We're very keen for your questions now.
Thank you very much, and that is sobering. And I did declare the interest as having worked as a social worker myself, actually an older person, so I do understand some of the some of the range. And one of the first events that I had the privilege of attending after I became an MLA was the launch. Sean Holland at that time launched the anti-poverty social work, and a really brilliant initiative. And I'm very mindful of the fact that the impact of vacancies now, as well as budgets and resource, the impact of vacancies in rolling out that type of work has to be quite severe. I was going to ask you, Andy, around the evidence on the cost, because I think that's a really interesting point. It's been raised here before. Like, that's a real cost. That's not a notional cost, or that's a real cost which you would be better spending on providing the solutions as losing almost in terms of, like when you mentioned there are 6 times more likely children most deprived, there's a massive cost to that alone.
On that, Chair, I mean, we know from, these figures go back to 2021, but in 2021 the cost of a child coming into care in foster care is £24,000 on average. Residential care, I think it was £265,000 on average. Now, no one is suggesting that those aren't essential services. You know more than anyone here in this room, probably, Colin, maybe other than Carolyn, how essential those services are. But when you have children coming into care and the factors that causing them coming into care are problems caused or exacerbated by poverty, when you know that there are solutions at hand, and the numbers of kids coming into care are spiralling. The figure I put into the pack, I think it was 3,941 children in care. That goes back to October. We know from Ray Jones' briefing to Health Committee last week and others that figure has now exceeded 4,000 children in care. It's a huge problem. When you have kids coming into care, there's a huge financial cost. There's a huge human cost. You know, in terms of those young people's, the trauma they've experienced that have led them into that situation, but then the impacts that being in care has on their life circumstances and opportunities and outcomes. We want to see problems fixed. We want to see problems fixed before they become crises. And we're seeing crises now in social work and across society.
And there's not a single social worker out there, I'm sure, or health professional who doesn't, in a very real way, understand the lost opportunities there in terms of being able to get in quicker before the crisis has become ingrained or more and more difficult. You know, so it is something that we really need to grapple how we can front load some of this preventative work and do it better. I think that's something we're going to have to focus our attention on, particularly because budgets are constrained. That makes it more important, not less. In relation to, before we go to members, other members' questions, and I note you've mentioned there as well the 2-child rule. Do you feel that would be the most impactful mitigation out of all of those recommended in the mitigation review?
When Ray Jones was briefing Health Committee just last week, his recommendation to Health Committee, and it would have been great if it had been to Communities Committee, was if you have money to spend on any one thing, spend it on mitigating the 2-child limit. I mean, the 2-child limit, it was brought in by Westminster. It shouldn't have been brought in. It's a regressive policy. It impacts children. It impacts families. It was said last week, I think it was Johnny Curry from Trussell Trust Brief Committee, you don't limit health interventions to the first 2 children in the family. You don't send the first 2 kids in the family to school. Why do you limit social security support to the first 2 children in a family? Now, BASBA are campaigning across at Westminster in the upcoming election. It's one of our top 5 priorities to have the 2-child limit removed. And it's that difficult situation, Chair, where it's brought in at Westminster, then it becomes a problem here. Although it was a problem caused by Westminster, we do have the potential solutions here at a cost. But just bringing it all the way back to the point I was making earlier about the auditing the costs of poverty. When your committee is hearing this, or when the Minister's hearing £56.4 million to mitigate the cost of the 2-child limit, that's a huge amount of money. But until we understand what the knock-on effects of not doing that are, I think it's premature to say we can't afford not to do it. You want to put the costs of intervention in the context of the costs of non-intervention. Yeah, and yeah, so that is why we are particularly focused on the 2-child limit. It's the fact that we see it as a very unjust piece of social policy.
Yeah, I fully agree. Those costs are massive, and we have written here as a committee. We have written to all of the departments as well around their need to input into the anti-poverty strategy. But I do feel that it's vital that the Minister for Communities is championing that in a very real way to the executive. You know, to ensure that awareness and that cohesion to a strategy is brought, and that the work that has, and you've referenced the previous minister setting up the review, that work is progressed. So a key priority on that. So listen, I'm going to go to Daniel, then I have Sean. Go ahead, Daniel. Let it hold.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being with us. I can't stress enough the importance of our social workers and the huge level of strain and stress that they are under with the rising demand on the need for their interventions. And we've seen at many occasions where, unfortunately, if the social workers are strained and stretched, where the consequences can be dire for a child and a family, and others as well, of course. So I just want to put on the record our sincerest appreciation to all social workers across Northern Ireland for their tremendous efforts and for the work that they do that does have a critical impact on the lives of so many children and young people. In terms of poverty, we're very well rehearsed now in this Assembly as to the dire impact it has on children. And I've noted that, importantly, actually, the strength of which you've highlighted the removal of the 2-child limit. Indeed, the SDLP on an opposition day recently brought forward a motion in relation to it because we do appreciate the severity it is having on families and young people. And the concern that we have, as I'm sure is shared with many, is that it will not be removed in a timely enough fashion. And in fact, it was amended as such to ensure that the time scales were removed, which really points to a problem for Stormont. We say we are concerned about all of these issues, but never get them resolved or done. And unless there's clear targets, then we're not going to achieve that. In terms of the question, your written briefing outlines the many problems that poverty creates or contributes to, in your professional opinions. How has the recent cost of living crisis exacerbated those issues? So there's always been an issue, which is clearly highlighted actually by the Controller and Auditor General's report, but how has the cost of living crisis and the increase of living affected the poverty issue in relation to children?
I suppose I'll take that. I mean, we know that, as you say rightly, there's always been an issue with poverty, and it's something that social workers are acutely aware of. But we also know from our members that the impact of the cost of living crisis, I mean, we all feel it ourselves, we all feel the pinch, but we're in a very lucky position that we can afford to run our houses and to make choices that we want to make for our children. What we're seeing is that, payday lenders, loan sharks, people are getting into debt. Disabled people, we know, it costs much more to raise a disabled child, 30% more to raise a disabled child. We know that women are adversely impacted by impacts of poverty. It tends to be lone parent families, and they tend to be mothers who have care of children. And we know very real stories where people are having to make very stark choices, literally between paying for heat for their home, providing lunches for their children, food for their children. And it's a really chronic problem. I mean, we had a recent example whereby a social worker went out to visit a home, and the father in the home was he was burning the spindles in the chairs to heat his home because he didn't have any money to buy heat. That's a really chronic situation to be in. It's very stark.
And it's worsening, actually.
It's worsening.
Daniel, in terms of statistics, to put kind of just stats on that, I mean, the number of children in the care of social services is the highest on record.
Yeah.
It's gone up incrementally year on year. There have been little dips here and there, but we're at the highest on record. Now, that overlaps with the period of lockdowns with COVID, which was absolutely catastrophic for children that were at risk of abuse in their home. But it also overlaps with the worst inflation we've had in I don't know how many decades. So we're looking at highest number of children in care on record, and that has come throughout the period of the cost of living crisis that's made those issues worse. There was a piece of research published UK-wide called the Child Welfare Inequalities Project. It was incredibly useful. When it looks at the impacts of deprivation on children, rates of neglect, emotional abuse and physical abuse tend to spike where there is greater deprivation. So that study was conducted a number of years ago, and I believe prior to the cost of living crisis. But those factors, increases in neglect, physical abuse, emotional abuse that are linked with deprivation, will have got worse.
Yeah, we would never be very careful to say that children are abused in families and the poverty is not the only factor. But I think genuinely the evidence that we have shows that the more extreme the poverty, the more extreme the risks are that children are going to slip into that child protection system.
And the absence of early intervention, I suppose, is a key component to as to why we're in this situation to begin with. You've said there that we have the highest numbers on record of children now in care, and the figures that you've cited earlier. So obviously foster carers, and a huge thank you to our foster carers out there. The cost of that place was £24,000 a year, and the residential care is £285,000 per year, which is a huge cost that we're having to meet. And the consequences is not acting early enough. That is the consequences of it. So just in relation to that, what is there a way that we can outline? And obviously the solution to all of this is early intervention, dealing with poverty and all those issues. But is there a way that we can promote the benefits of foster care more so obviously than the financial benefit of £24,000 a year? People don't do it for that. But what else can we do to ensure that we get more foster carers to alleviate the huge financial pressure that exists in relation to the £265,000 for residential care?
Yeah, I mean, most people who go forward and end up in the care system, I mean, obviously it's preferable that children remain in their families. And kinship care is something that's been developed in Northern Ireland, and that's something that we really want to promote. Where that's not possible, we then look to other alternatives, and we look then at foster care or residential care. And obviously there's less children in residential care because they're the very extreme end. There's more children in residential care than we would like to be in residential care. So I think, I mean, in fairness, the trusts who work across and some of the voluntary community agencies who also provide foster carers, they work really hard. They do an enormously good job. I think there's an issue in terms of legislation which is coming forward, the Children and Adoptions Bill, that will put on the trust new duties to support and develop and pay foster carers. And that, I think, will bring huge benefits in terms of the foster carers that we have available. I'm slightly concerned that there's no reluctance to bring it on board, but I think that what we're hearing from social workers is, and from within the trusts, that they simply don't have the demand to meet the capacity. So there's increased demand on their services. They don't have enough social work staff on the ground at this stage. We don't have enough social workers coming through who are being qualified and trained. So it's a bit of a vicious circle at this stage, that we've things in motion that will provide an improvement in services. But if we can't get social workers in and support them and retain them in practice, there's a challenge to how we continue to do that. But I would say that each of the trusts and the voluntary community sector are very engaged and really doing all they can. And I think the legislation that we have coming forward will help support that.
Thank you. And just very briefly, Chair, you've mentioned earlier the Child Poverty Action Group's estimation that the child poverty costs in the UK are 39 billion per year, which is like beyond all comprehension. In addition to removing the 2-child limit, which I've referenced earlier, where do you think we need to invest in supporting children to reduce that overall cost?
What other anti-poverty interventions, Daniel? I mean, our focus very much is on the 2-child limit. That's why we were focusing on that today. But in terms of what else needs to be taken forward, the former Minister for Communities commissioned the expert advisory panel to work up the recommendations for the anti-poverty strategy. Those recommendations have been ready, I think, since December 2020. Yeah. Subsequently, the anti-poverty strategy expert, co-production group, have produced their report. That's available online. I mean, the individuals involved in that are the best of the best in Northern Ireland. The recommendations are all there. They're there to be digested by the department, but they're there for the committee as well to review. I don't want to add to that work. That work has been done, and I think it's for the community to review those documents.
Thank you, Daniel. Sian?
Yeah, thank you both so much. I know, Nancy, we've engaged a wee bit through the work with the Cliff Edge Coalition, so I just want to say that I really appreciate your briefing, and I appreciate the work that you've done. In terms of the cost of inaction, I think for me that's a really big point, and I think during the aforementioned debate, my final sentence was that We have to stop asking how much this is going to cost to do, but actually how much it's going to cost not to do. And I think that is really key. And for me, a really key piece of legislation that I have been banging on about since I became an MLA is the Children's Services Cooperation Act. And for me, it's there, the legislation's in place. Can I just ask a wee bit of your assessment of how that is being utilised? Is it being utilised? Is it effective? Do we think that if government bodies, statutory agencies were actually utilising CASCA, would we more effectively be able to make a real dent in the elimination of that toxic 3? I think that's my kind of the first point, is CASCA fit for purpose if it were being used properly, and is it being used properly, I guess?
And I think it offers real opportunities, and there certainly is real evidence of engagement across voluntary community partnerships, trust partnerships around the hubs that have been developed.
Yeah.
And I think there's really evidence of good work. I think it maybe doesn't necessarily go far enough, but I think that to be taken forward, I think that the crisis is simply that social work teams are so pressured at this stage. And I think that we need to be able to screen out, in essence. We need to be able to say, this is what someone needs, this is what a family needs, to be able to give them the service that they need in a community setting without getting involved in child protection systems. Mm-hmm. We had a conversation the other day, and they were talking about, we heard from a social worker who'd really changed things in children's services in Leeds, and he'd moved his authority from being a failing authority to being outstanding. And what he was talking about was actually having a holistic approach to how services are delivered, and being able to move. What he was able to say was that they looked at the referrals that came in, for example, to children's services. 10% were high-end, high-risk, needed child protection involvement. 90% were low risk, were early intervention, were things where people needed support, they needed development, and if other services were available, they would never get through the door, in essence. So we were really trying to think, well, how could we do that here? How do we reconfigure? And I think that's a pattern that we see in children's services at this stage. Because our services are so limited, everything, it fails because we don't provide early intervention. We're able to pick up some of those families through the hubs. We don't simply get enough of them. And so we tend to, people have to wait, and then it becomes a crisis. And then it's a crisis referral through to children's services, where then they get the full force, if you like, of a child protection investigation or a children in need assessment. And actually what they need is much earlier intervention. And I think that's what we need to begin to do. I mean, it's not all about funding. A lot of it will be about funding, but I think there was some sense of hope that we could actually try and begin that process without additional funding at this stage, to begin to refocus. And that's about making things better for children, for families, and for social workers, because their well-being is important in all of this as well. I think we're recognising that the current system is in such crisis that we're really not providing a good service to anybody.
And just in relation to the Cooperation Act, that Northern Ireland Audit Office report I mentioned earlier, it's Child Poverty in Northern Ireland, it's in the pack. It reviewed the success or otherwise of the child poverty strategy, and one of the points that was made in that report by the Comptroller and Auditor General, that the child poverty strategy delivered siloed working, which led to siloed interventions and ultimately poor outcomes. I mean, poverty can't be the Department for Communities issue. The Department of Communities is leading on this issue. It has to be an executive-wide issue. I mean, the Department of Health published a press release yesterday. I'm just going to pull this up for the figures. They estimate that health inequalities cost Northern Ireland up to £1.7 billion every year in health. That is as much a problem for health as it is for communities. So when we're looking at child poverty, or we're looking at poverty across the society in Northern Ireland, we need to stop thinking about this as a DFC issue. This is a DFC lead issue that the other departments need to be bought into. Hence, coming back to the argument for the poverty audit, if we had a clear picture at executive level of how much is being lost to everyone's budget because of poverty, I think it would be an awful lot easier for policymakers to be channeling funds towards intervention. So that kind of answers your question. I'd come back to the Auditor General report. Siloed working was what happened in terms of the child poverty strategy, and siloed working doesn't deliver good results.
Yeah, and we know that, we know from social work colleagues who work in the voluntary and community sector that, the relationship they have with the trust is very important. But the relationship they have, the funding that they get, how services are organised, genuinely they're not making really good use of that. And I think the community and voluntary sector are a really vibrant resource who can, by nature of how they're organised and how they work, they can come up with really innovative ideas to tackle some of the problems that we have. We just need to ask, and we need to have, them brought into the conversation a bit more.
They need the support too.
They do need the support, absolutely.
To be able to
they
deliver
need the
the
support.
services. I have a few other questions, Chair, but I can follow that up in writing rather than taking up time here.
Okay, thank you. And I suppose, just in terms of the reference we have mentioned here earlier about the need for the Department for Communities to be championing that, it is frustrating sometimes, I suppose, to in terms of this committee's remit around the community's brief, what can we do to expedite things? And I suppose a similar question to the one earlier, and excluding the 2-child limit, which has the point has been well made around. Is there any other, in terms of the Department for Communities, any other single legislative or policy lever that would help in the current situation that could be identified?
One thing I would point out, so Cliff Edge were here last week, Baswa is a lead member of Cliff Edge. The mitigations package which has been in place since 2016 has been incredibly significant. The Cliff Edge Coalition formed because the mitigations package was due to run out. We're now campaigning for a strengthened mitigations package, but what's currently in place isn't going to last forever. There is another Cliff Edge we're facing at next March, which is very soon. So not to lose sight of that, Chair, in terms of the mitigations for the benefit cap, those need to be front and centre, I think, of the committee's attention, because they will run out in March 2025, and that needs to be extended. Otherwise, a lot of people will be impacted again by that. But I would just bring you back again. So there's the Les Allenby-led mitigations review report outlines a suite of recommendations for the department. We have the anti-poverty strategy expert advisory panel report and the co-design group report. There are many recommendations for the department, and we would like to see progress across them. I don't want to start and cherry pick things from those documents, focusing very much on the 2-child limit as a really important and good place to start. If we could get the 2-child limit removed, that would be class, and then we move on. But I wouldn't want to distract from the importance of addressing the 2-child limit at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Brian. Yep. Okay,
well, I just want to thank you for attending today. Your paper is very helpful, actually, and contains a lot of very useful information for us and statistics, and just appreciate the work that your members do in supporting vulnerable families and families experiencing poverty. And I know my own constituency work, the vast majority of work is for people who are in vulnerable circumstances and who need that extra support. And the work you're doing to preventing people going even into further crisis, particularly for children. In terms of, you mentioned the shortage of social workers as well, so obviously there are pressures on all aspects of the government budget. We want to see the increase in Northern Ireland Block grant, or even better, changes made at Westminster level, in funding arrangements for benefits. So some mitigations are in place that the executive previously agreed, and that takes money out of our funding for public services. And so we're in a circumstance where I know you've focused on the 2-child limit and universal credit, and what the potential cost of that would be, and finding funding for that. But so the only question I would make, and appreciate your involvement. I don't know if you were involved directly in the expert panel as an organisation. You weren't. But you mentioned to the co-production group. Were you involved in that?
No, we weren't involved in that.
Okay. But have you? There's lots of useful information in your paper. Have you produced any longer paper as such with other issues that you've highlighted?
No, BASWA, we exist primarily for our members and to guide their practice. So we have a anti-poverty practice guide, which is to help social workers focus on how best to support service users that are experiencing poverty. But in terms of briefing documents, Mr. Kingston, no, that's the document.
Yeah.
We could certainly, if there's other information you'd like,
Yeah.
we can.
Yeah. No, but I just want to say it is very helpful though to have experts working in the field, making that representation, and from your experience, that we get both people with lived experience and people with professional expertise. So, no, I'm sure we'll have further opportunities to engage with yourselves.
Just one thing though, in terms of your constituency, Mr. Kingston, I mean, in Belfast North, the End Child Poverty Coalition statistics that were published in December, I think it's 14% of children in Belfast North are affected by the 2-child limit. It's the second highest. West Belfast is the highest, and the levels of poverty produced by the End Child Poverty Coalition stats. Belfast North is 29% of children are in poverty, second only to West Belfast. So I'm not saying there is a causation there, but where the 2-child limit is affecting most children, the most children are also in poverty. And I think tragically as well, in terms of Belfast as well, North Belfast we know has been impacted massively by rates of suicide, and over the last decade I think has been the worst impacted constituency as well. So there are problems that you'll be facing as a constituency MLA that our members are also facing, and it's making those links, joining that up and having a government response that, we like to say when parents are struggling, it's not parents failing children, this is a situation where society is failing families, and we need a better response from the executive.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And I want to also reiterate just our appreciation and acknowledgement of the work that social workers and social work and the key role that plays and can play in empowering and in moving us forward in a way which allows people to get out of that trap of and sometimes it is a trap, and it's something that without concentrated action and continued action, it's almost an impossible challenge. So thank your members for that. Thank you for your presentation today, and we look forward to engaging with you again in the future.
Great. And thank you all for your comments in terms of thanks to social workers, and we'll make sure that goes out from all of you to our members. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members, I'm going to take just a very short break there to allow.
Before we move on,
Yep,
sorry, it
yep,
was just
go
around. It would be really good if we could that audit of public services and the poverty piece. If that is maybe something again after recess that we could maybe put on a future work plan, I'd be really interested in trying to see where that would fit and whether that's something that we could, whether it's through this committee or through the executive office. I would assume potentially might have to take that, but it could be something just to look into if that's okay. Yep.
Members content with that? Yep. Okay, members, we're going to take a short break there, just about 5 minutes. If we could resume at 11:15, please. Thank you.
I'll just request.
Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound.
We're in the process of asking to go back to open session, Daniel, so back in a minute.
Citizen open again.
Okay, members, so we'll resume then at agenda item 6, which is a raised briefing which we're hearing today on the pensions extension of auto enrolment bill. So the briefing paper for this agenda item starts there at your pack, and your pack, members, at page 249. I would now like to welcome Assembly official Eleanor Murphy to the meeting here today. And Eleanor, if you could go ahead and make your opening statement, and then we'll go to any questions that members might have. Thank you.
Very much, Chair. I'm trying to make this as succinct as possible. So I'm going to cover a couple of areas. So a brief overview of the bill. I won't linger on that because you're already well familiar with that. But I thought I also would look at what is parity, because parity is very central to this committee's remit. But you've already been discussing parity for most of the morning. But if I just explore with you what the legislative basis for parity is, because it's very relevant to this bill, and also what the fiscal implications are. And then if I look at some of the issues raised by the Westminster Bills Committee, because they looked at exactly the same pensions bill that you're going to be looking at, and they were largely supportive of the bill, but they did raise some issues that have already been raised by this committee early in the consideration of this bill, and also then just identify a few issues for the committee maybe to consider. So, as you know, the bill, if enacted, would amend the Pensions Number 2 bill to provide regulation-making powers to the department. Those regulations would reduce the age at which eligible workers are automatically enrolled and re-enrolled from the ages of 22 to 18, and also to reduce or abolish the lower earnings limit. And I said this is a parity bill. It's already been enacted at Westminster. So if we just look at what parity is, it's based on Section 87 of the Northern Ireland Act, and what it essentially says is the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions and the Minister for Communities should consult with one another to maintain, as far as possible, a single system of social security, child support and pensions for the United Kingdom. So the key word there is consult. It doesn't say it must or it should, but obviously, you know, with welfare reform mitigations, there can be substantial cost implications, and that's set out in the UK funding statement for the devolved administrations, basically saying if the Northern Irish Executive decides to deviate from parity in any way, then the Treasury will take a decision on whether or not that the Northern Ireland Executive will pay for those cost implications. So obviously pensions is devolved. It is within the power of the Assembly to deviate from that policy if it should decide to do so. But obviously there would be cost implications not only for the Assembly, but also if you decided, for example, to change the contribution amounts for employers or employees. It would have implications for employers and employees. But there are lots of ways and mechanisms in which the Assembly can actually challenge decisions made by DWP, and this committee is really central to that. And you've already proved that you're not shy in writing to DWP and questioning the decisions it has made, but also our MPs, our House of Lords, our Minister and our officials also have a role in questioning and working with DWP on pensions and social security. So parity in pensions policy and legislation is a little more closely knit and a little more difficult to unpick, because eligible workers in Northern Ireland are obviously employed by UK employers and are members of UK-wide pension schemes. Also local employers within Northern Ireland will use pensions that are UK-wide, although there are some local providers of pensions. But also because the regulatory system is very much interwoven, because there's a single pensions regulator throughout the UK, and that's the pensions regulator. So if we now turn to look at the Westminster Bill that has been enacted. It was introduced as a private member's bill, interestingly enough, by an MP called Jonathan Gullis. But it was supported by the UK government too, and the DWP wrote the regulatory impact assessment and the explanatory memorandum. So the purpose of that bill, similar to this bill, was to enact 2 proposals contained within this 2017 statutory review of automatic enrolment, and that's in relation to age threshold and the lower earnings limit as well. But just to make you aware, the 2017 review was very wide-ranging. It just didn't look at those things. It also looked at pension provisions for the self-employed. Now, that isn't part of this bill, but I mention it because it's likely to come up as part of your consultation. The statutory review didn't recommend that automatic enrolment should be used for the self-employed. It didn't feel that the framework was right. You may hear other opinions on that. But this is a very complicated issue. The self-employed are not a homogenous group. I think there is a tendency to think the self-employed is affluent. They're not. Some are, but most aren't. And they have wide fluctuations in their income, which affects pension provision. So there has been research recently by the Institute of Fiscal Studies which shows that the number of self-employed are actually going up, but the pension savings amongst the self-employed is actually going down, and there's very complicated reasons behind that. But just something to bear in mind with. It isn't part of the bill, but something that's likely to come up in part of your call for evidence. So as I said, the Public Bills Committee were largely supportive of the bill, but they did raise a number of issues. Firstly, there was a proposed amendment, obviously wasn't successful. One of the members wanted to lower the age threshold from 18 to 16, and to bring it into line with national insurance and income tax. So the member that proposed the bill said he was happy to discuss the issue with the member, but that the purpose of his bill was to action the 2017 statutory review proposals, and that was age 18. But the Minister for Pensions did say, as part of its communication strategy, which something that this committee might want to look at, is that opt-in arrangements for 16 and 17-year-olds are promoted as part of that strategy. So one member also expressed the concern about a lack of understanding about pensions in general, and that it was a real problem when it came to future planning. And I think that's a very salient, fair point. It's very difficult to get people excited or interested in pensions. So this is an issue that the committee has already raised. The member sought further information on what work DWP were going to do to consult with pension savers and young people in particular about these changes, and how it's going to make them aware of them, and how it's going to encourage them to be automatically enrolled. And also then post-introduction of the subordinate legislation, what will be done to consult with employers, employee organisations, trade unions on the rollout of automatic enrolment. The same member also questioned about the timing of the introduction of the subordinate legislation, and whether the government would be taking into consideration the performance of the economy and also the cost of living crisis. Some potential issues for the committee to consider. You've already considered this. It's this communication strategy is key to all this when the regulations are introduced. The rollout about how are you going to actually communicate with young people in particular, and low income workers, and small businesses and small to medium businesses as well. How are you going to get them engaged with it as well? The issue of pensions and the self-employed, as said, not part of the bill, but you may want to consider at another stage that's an issue that you may want to look at a little closer. So the Institute of Fiscal Studies, they're doing a wide-ranging review on the pensions infrastructure, and you might want to tap into some of the work that they've already done in that, and perhaps maybe receive a briefing from them on pensions in general, not just automatic enrolment. So again, post-introduction of the regulations, you might want to consider what plans the FC have in terms of monitoring the progress with local employers and eligible workers in terms of the early identification of issues, and that you might want to consider that the DFC provides you with regular updates on any problems or emerging issues that are sort of arising. And that's essentially it. It's a short bill, so there's not a great deal to say on that.
Okay, well, thank you, Eleanor. And that is a useful refresher on the bill itself and the surrounding issues. And I have to say, I do think that communication strategy for young people is a key issue. And actually, building on that, one of the things you've said has kind of prompted the need for ongoing communication, because the cost of living crisis could well mean that some people aren't just in the space of being able to even consider pensions, you know, and you know that, and it's very clear that you know food and prices and things are continuing to go up, albeit maybe slightly slower, but they're not coming down. So it's all still. So I think, you know, just the initial, when someone turns that age or whatever, if the communication strategy moves on and doesn't revisit that, I think there's a potential. And in light of that, have we any knowledge about how it has impacted in terms of the rollout across the water? You know, is there figures around how many people have signed up, how many haven't, how they're being engaged with?
The regulations haven't, as far as I'm aware, come into force across the water either.
Okay.
So it'll depend on when the next government decides if and when to introduce those. So there's no early research or indication of what that could look like, which is why the committee might want to consider monitoring closely the rollout in Northern Ireland.
And in light of that, is there a communication strategy in place for when they do go ahead with the regulations, or do we know what their communication strategy is likely to be?
No, I don't. But I could ask DWP if they have already made decisions.
It might be useful, because I know the Minister had in some of the previous debate had mentioned, you know, around dashboard, and I had made, and I think other committee members maybe agreed with the point that particularly young people at that age, checking government dashboards at any time might be something that's not top of their priority, but checking for pensions is a kind of almost a double non-engagement, on potential for non-engagement. I'm not saying that would apply to everyone, and young people are just as astute as anyone else, but in terms of priorities or whatever, I think we should be looking beyond, you know, we should be looking to communicate with young people in areas where they get their news and information from. Should that be online? Should that be some of the platforms? I think we should be imaginative and inclusive in the sense, and we also need to be very alert to vulnerabilities around communication. So, you know, all of those language issues, all of that needs to be considered as well. Literacy, so that no one is placed at a disadvantage. So that's been useful. I see a hand up from Ciara there, so I'll go to Ciara in the first instance and then see if there's any other questions from members. And Sean?
I suppose it's just two things. I definitely would reiterate that communication piece is critical. Is there any analysis, even from obviously back in 2017 and obviously the opting in, etc., etc.? I think, I'm not too sure if I can recall, but the percentage was around 20% were opting out. Is there any analysis? Would we have any local analysis of that 20%? Where they live, because obviously from our previous even presentation, you would assume it is due to cost of living, those most in need. And so we're really, really good, because that's where we need to prioritise, is those that aren't opting in and how we can support them. And then likewise, I would agree too regarding self-employed. That's quite concerning. And maybe following up after the elections and stuff with regards to the progress on that. Within GB, etc., where that's at, what's the research been done on it? So I think that's two areas. The 20% that are opting out, if we any deeper delve or analysis of that, and the reasons why, and particularly where, and constituencies across here the north, I would just I'm assuming it's those areas most in need, and those working families most in need, and our most disadvantaged communities, and how they can be supported as well. So just two areas, I think, as a committee, we could continue to follow up on.
I could definitely have a look at that. I did look to see if I could find Northern Ireland specific figures in automatic enrolment, and it was difficult to find any. There were UK-wide figures in the regulatory impact assessment that DWP produced. It could be there's just methodological difficulties from extracting Northern Ireland data, given that they're UK-wide pension schemes. But I'll have another look at that. But there have been studies in terms of engagement of young people and more vulnerable groups in pensions, so I could pass that on to you.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you, Ciara. So then I have Sean, Brian and Daniel. Sean.
Yeah, my point follows on a wee bit from the self-employed bit. I think something that's been brought up to me in my own constituency is around farmers who are self-employed, who might not necessarily have the same accessibility to those online fora. So I think for me that communication strategy, and obviously young people we've discussed before, and I discussed it in the chamber, but for me as well, there maybe is that rural support element to it as well, that's been coming up quite a lot between universal credit issues and pension.
Thank you. Brian?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Eleanor. Yeah, I mean, the advantage to this extending this automatic enrolment to me is just to make pension contributions the norm, both for employees and employers, so that it is seen as normal that the employer is assisting the employee and the employee is paying into their pension. So can you just clarify for me, in terms of an employer's contribution, will that be automatic within this, that the employer has to make, as well as the employee being enrolled? And I know that's an issue for young employees if they have what they see as more pressing financial demands, that they don't want some of their income going to pension for a faraway day, but for them to know that, well, if you pay in your pension contribution, your employer will be supplementing that, so you're getting more money.
The employer does make a contribution. Sorry, there's figures in the paper.
Yes.
I don't have them at the top of the head. So the employer does make a contribution. Obviously, the employee makes a contribution. There's also some form of tax relief from the government involved in that as well.
But that is mandatory, that the employer
Yes.
must also make a contribution.
As far as I'm aware, yes.
Yeah. And I think it's important that people see that there's actually a benefit, that there's more money coming to them, albeit some of it in the long term.
I think that's again part of the communication strategy. So the department do have quite a task ahead of it, because people aren't really engaged so much in pensions issues, particularly young people, and it's also getting that message across that yes, there is a contribution from your employer, there's a contribution from the government, and it is worth your while then to become part of a pension scheme.
Yes, and if you opt out, which you have the right to do, you're actually missing out on those extra contributions. You know,
sort of getting that message across to people that in the long term, even if you can put a little bit of money in, that it'll benefit you in the long run. But as you say, there are people that are struggling to make ends meet, and getting them to see that, or if they even have the resources available to do that at the minute, it's quite difficult.
I have two other questions, Chair, if it's with time. One is the actual choice of pension provider up to the employee, or is it between the employee and the employer? I presume if the employee has an existing pension policy, they can say that's the one they want to use. Sometimes employers have a preferred pension policy.
Largely, it's the employer picks the pension. I'm not quite sure. I'll clarify that for you and come back.
I just know when you move around, at one stage when I moved around different jobs, I found out lots of different, each job you went to, they had a preferred, pension. And then eventually I had to combine them all. But I think Nest is the government preferred. That's like the official scheme.
We do have one local scheme, the Workers' Trust.
Yes, I actually have a small pension with them as well from one of my previous jobs.
So hopefully we're going to hear from them as part of the call for evidence as well, because they'd be probably able to give you a more local perspective on some of the local issues with automatic enrolment.
Well, the other, I would hope, benefit of this is an impact on people being unofficially employed, you know, whether they think that's to their advantage, but it's actually to the employers. If people are just being paid in cash in the grey market, and then they're not getting any pension contribution, they're very vulnerable, you know. And I hope when this going out will reinforce the idea you should be properly employed with employees' rights and a proper pension and that contribution, because people are being exploited and they might think, oh, I'm getting cash here, but everything which promotes proper employment is better for all concerned.
Yeah, so I hope that's part of the communication strategy. That was another issue, people who are sort of the black market sort of employment side of things, and also people that work in the gig economy, freelancers, people who are on zero-hours contracts have quite limited means to pay into a pension and reap the benefits of that pension.
Okay.
There's work being done around that as well.
Okay, thank you. You, Chair.
Thank you, Brian. Daniel?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Anna, for the work on this. Just a couple of things I was interested in the 16-year-old element, how it was explored, but also in terms of young people generally. I don't know if Sharon has mentioned this in the last few weeks, but maybe a bit more, a better communication strategy, basically, about the importance of pension, because a lot of young people just think pensions for old people, and that is just the view. Like, oh, that'll be ancient by the time we need that, and it's not at all accurate. It's about planning for the future, and I think a proper communication strategy that steers that narrative is going to be important.
Well, that is a really important point, and also it's not just an issue for the Department for Communities either. You know, it starts in education, making sure young people are financially educated, and not just in terms of pensions, but on rent, on mortgages, on budgeting. It's a much wider issue than just that for the Department for Communities.
We've long argued it should be a key part of the curriculum in schools, actually, in terms of greater awareness. It's much more useful for young people going forward. And another slight point in relation to, and I know it relates more to the state pension, but the messing about by the government on the state pension age, do you think that has had an impact on the reputation of pensions generally and the uptake of them, for instance?
I don't know if there's research to prove that. I could have a look, but I think generally pensions have had a bit of a rough time because if you in the 80s and 90s there was a lot of pensions providers crashed, and generally I think that impacted in people's perceptions of pensions, and so there's a large body of work to go into sort of making people trust pensions again. Not just automatic enrolment, but all sorts of forms of pensions, including state pension age.
Just in relation to the statistics point to positive moves in the right direction, obviously, in relation to the uptake of pension schemes in 2021, 73%, 2011 was 45%, so the increase has been quite significant in the private sector, up by 39% as opposed to 12% in the public sector. That said, only 62% of the private sector workers are in a pension scheme, so as opposed to the 92% in the public sector. When conducting the research, did you become aware of the reason for such a disparity?
No, I didn't, but again, that's something I can take a look at.
And similarly, did you counter any information that would suggest that the changes brought about by this bill can potentially reduce the disparity between the uptake in public and private sector?
No, short answer is I'm not sure of that. That's something I need to go away and consider. I'm far from a pensions expert.
No,
I cover
your research
such
is very
a broad
good,
range of issues.
Just a few probing questions mainly than anything else.
But that's definitely something, that's what I'm here for, to take it away and have a look at.
And just, Chair, if you indulge, in terms of other jurisdictions, is there any comparatives compared to the uptake in other jurisdictions compared to Northern Ireland, for instance? Have we an acute issue here? Or?
Again, it was very difficult to find a breakdown of those figures. They all tended to be UK-wide figures, and as I said, there's probably methodological reasons for that, in that it's quite hard to break, because people belong to UK-wide pension schemes. It's maybe hard to break it down into jurisdictions, but I could see maybe if DWP, for example, have or ONS have other data that we can use so we can compare and contrast the different jurisdictions.
And any information on why some workers have chose to opt out of pension schemes in Northern Ireland?
Maybe the employer isn't promoting it enough, and probably they just can't afford to, or they see it as something that they can't afford to do.
There's a recent criticism, Chair, just briefly, and I've heard this from someone that worked all their lives, paid significantly into their pension, and unfortunately passed away a few years later. The pension halved then, and only half of that pension that their partner had worked all their lives for to build up was received. Do you think that this incentivises people from going down this route? when really they could have invested probably that money the whole way along. I'm playing devil's advocate a wee bit, but it's just there's all these things in relation to pensions that are real questions on people's minds now, because people are looking after every pound and the climate that we're in. Why would you pay into a system? You know, is that coming up in your research? No.
Not that I've come across, but as I said, I only had a very cursory look at it. But there are bodies such as the Pensions Research Institute, and they've done a lot of work in the behavioural reasons why people don't engage with pensions, why they may not trust pensions. So if I could send you, the links and the information to those.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I suppose just in terms of reiterating, and the self-employed thing is a real concern, because work, especially for young people, has become more and more precarious, and there's more. And like, I'm aware of young people working multiple jobs in my own community, some of them across the border and some of them in the north, but having to put 2 or 3 or 4 pieces of work together on a weekly basis. And you know, we could, if we don't be very, very alert to this self-employed issue. I agree with Sean's point as well around the farmers, and I know they're having massive difficulty at the minute with universal credit because of fluctuations in income. And also just to say that an awful lot of those people who are self-employed are on the lower end of the income scale rather than that perception which you rightly identify. So we could be creating a pensions time bomb, and some of the people who are currently at a disadvantage of not being able to afford it will experience, and that disadvantage will actually deepen across their life course as a result of the decisions they are maybe aware of or not able to make at this point in time. I think that also speaks to the need for communication around the value of it and the ongoing need for communication. So if someone this year can't afford to pay a pension, they're picked up again somewhere next year to prompt them to go back and reconsider that. Have things changed? Could you now start contributing? I think for young people that's particularly important.
I think that's why I mentioned the Institute of Fiscal Studies. They're doing this 3-year project looking at pensions, and I think one of their concerns is that people just aren't saving enough for the future, that the current cohort of pensioners are not in too bad a position, relatively speaking, but it's the future generations that are likely to be heading for difficulties, and that the pensions infrastructure has to change to ensure that our future generations are protected in terms of pensions. So it would be quite useful if the committee could engage in some way. There is some early reports, I can send you the links to those, but it'd be useful to keep watch and brief and maybe have some briefings on that from the Institute or from other, so the Pensions Research Institute, so the committee has an overall view of pensions, not automatic enrolment.
And in relation to the cross-border issue, is there any coordination or potential for coordination or memorandum of understanding or anything like that in relation to people maybe having split pensions in that sense, or multiple pensions?
There's a protocol between the UK government and the Southern government on social security matters that may include pensions. I'll have a look at that.
Okay.
But another important body would be the Centre for Cross-Border Studies. If you could maybe contact them and ask them to contribute as well to the call for evidence on a wider pension issues, not necessarily automatic enrolment, but
Yeah, but it is a juncture in which we're looking at pension, and maybe it's useful that we could start to feed in some of those threads that maybe would improve the situation as we go forward. Okay, thank you, members. I think that's everything then for now. But thank you, Eleanor, for clarifying those issues, taking the questions, and taking away some further questions indeed for coming back to us with them. Thanks, members, and thanks, Eleanor.
Thanks, Eleanor.
Yep. Okay, members. So, Clerk, do you want to clarify in terms of any of the follow-up actions, or?
Yeah, we will add the Institute of Fiscal Studies and the Centre for Cross-Border Studies to the list of consultees. So we're going to follow up with that in the next minute or two in terms of who we're going to seek views from. So we'll add those to that list, and I'll liaise with Eleanor on the broader pensions points.
Okay. Thank you very much. So that then, members, allows us to move on to agenda item 7, which is the extension of automatic enrolment bill, pensions bill. There are a few procedural items now that we need to consider. So at page 279, there's a draft motion to extend committee stage, and that states that a copy of the motion is lodged with the business office. So do I need to get a consent from members now?
Yeah,
So
it's-
members agreed that we extend that committee stage? Yep. Thank you. And members, you've also been provided with the following papers. So at page 280 there's a draft bill timetable. There are questions for the citizen space call for evidence, which will be published on the committee pages of the website, and that's at page 282. We have a delegated powers memorandum at page 284, and a copy of the signposting ad, which will be placed in the 3 main newspapers at page 290. Are members content to note those papers? Yep, thank you, members. You've also, members, been provided page 3 of the tabled papers with a draft media release on the call for evidence. Are members content to agree the media release? Yep, thank you. At page 5 of table papers for noting is a draft speaking note for a short video that will go to the committee web pages. Members, over the coming weeks the committee staff will collate all those papers in relation to the bill into an electronic bill folder, which we will bring to the meeting each week. So members content with all of that? Thank you. Agenda item 8 then, members, we're moving on then to SR 2024/119. Social Security State Pension Age Claimants Closure of Tax Credits Amendment Regulations NI 2024, and they're at page 294. So members, we did consider this SL at SL1 stage at our meeting on the 25th of April when we were content for the department to proceed to make the rule. Do members have any objection to the rule? No. Members content? Thank you. So I'll put the following question formally then. That the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2024/119, the Social Security State Pension Age Claimants Closure of Tax Credits Amendment Regulations NI 2024, and has no objection to the rule, subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report. Are members agreed? Agreed. Thank you, members. Agenda item 9, SR 2024/123, the Smoke, Heat and Carbon Monoxide Alarms for Private Tenancies Regulations NI 2024, page 321. So, members, we considered this at SL1 stage at our meeting on the 23rd of May when we had a briefing from department officials and confirmed that we were content for the department to proceed to make the rule. In your table papers at page 7, you have also been provided with a departmental reply to committee queries raised at the briefing session on 23rd of May. The officials had agreed to provide additional information in relation to the equivalent standards in relation to smoke, heat and carbon monoxide alarms for registered housing associations, and those are outlined in the reply. Also in table papers at page 10 is the latest report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules. This rule has been considered by the Examiner, but she has no comment to make on it. So have members any comment they wish to make in relation to that, or are they content to note the reply? Content to note, thank you. And have members any objection to the rule? No? So then I'll put the following question formally. That the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2024/123, the Smoke, Heat and Carbon Monoxide Alarms for Private Tenancies Regulations NI 2024, and has no objection to the rule. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. Agenda item 10, SR, the Local Government Remote Meetings Regulations NI 2024, which are on page 337. We considered this, members, at SL1 stage at our meeting on the 25th of April, and we were content at that point for the department to proceed to make the rule. Have members any objection to the rule? No. Or queries in relation to that? No. Thank you. Then, members, can I put the question that the Committee for Communities has considered the Local Government Remote Meetings Regulations NI 2024 and recommends that it is approved by the Assembly. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 11, members, SL1, the Pensions 2005 Codes of Practice Revocation Order NI 2024. Members, a copy of this SL1 is at page 347. The order will revoke 10 of the pension regulators' existing codes of practice. The 10 codes which are being revoked are being replaced by a new code of practice which provides more accessible guidance for pension schemes. and incorporates changes introduced by the Occupational Pension Schemes Governance Amendment Regulations 2018. Have members any comments, or are you content for the department to proceed to make the rule? Content, thank you, members. Moving on to item 12, members, correspondence, and I refer members to the correspondence memo at page 354 of your meeting pack. Do members have any comments in relation to any of the items contained therein? Just to flag, members, that we have two requests to brief the committee, one from Nikki, Children's Commissioner, and the other from the Association of British Insurers, who want to brief on the pensions extension of auto enrolment bill. Are members content that briefings are arranged for meetings following summer recess? Yep, thank you. We also have a request from National Museums NI to host a future committee meeting in one of its venues. Would members be content that we agree to this request and look into that?
Yeah, because
Yeah, good.
Yep, okay. The other one then is around the Homeless Connect letter there. I see it includes a request for the DFC Minister to reconsider the resources allocated and to do everything in his power to find additional resources. And just as supposed to say that that 400 figure was mentioned here last week, like that is very, very disappointingly small. There's no question about it. In the context of there being, and we've heard it here today again, 47,000 households in the waiting list. In terms of social housing allocations, it's just vital that it's based on objective need and prioritising housing need in the areas for the social waiting list. But extremely worrying around the overall figure, I have to say, just to reiterate that. So, members, are you then otherwise? Ciara, go ahead, please. Unmute, Ciara.
Apologies for that. No, just to reiterate again, I think it's really, really pertinent and really welcome Homeless Connect and a number of organisations highlighting the seriousness of the issue, not just our own minister, but the all ministers. So we need to thank them for that. And it's just reiterating once again, it's critically important, obviously, that housing is a priority within the programme for government, and that we work collectively to ensure that how can we address this quite serious issue. And likewise then, and I'll just reiterate, as you said, Colin, ensuring that it is based on objective need and prioritising those areas in housing need, particularly the constituency that I'm in, which is Foy, where we have a high number of those in temporary accommodation as well. So it's really, really critically important. It remains high on the agenda, and it's something that we collectively, probably as a committee, working with Homeless Connect and other organisations, and seeing how we keep this high on the agenda, and it really urgently needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Yeah, and just to flag up that the People's Postcode Lottery included in correspondence at receptions taking place today, so just to add to members' attention. Are members otherwise content then to note the correspondence memo?
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. And agenda item 13 then, forward work programme. So you'll find that, members, in your packet, page 535. Any comment or content to note the forward work programme for now, members? Content? Thank you. Agenda item 14. Any other business? Members today? No. Thank you. Okay, members. So then, final item 15 is date, time, and location of our next meeting. Our next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 20th of June 2024 in room 29 here in Parliament Buildings. The meeting is now adjourned, and I would ask the clerk to take us out of public session.